Hi. Welcome to the Poetry Center and American Poetry Archives. We have a continuing series that will be going through the end of April, or actually culminates May 7th with the Student Awards reading, which takes place here on campus. But between now and then, we have several writers I'd like to let you know about. Working backward, we have on the 30th for National Poetry Month, we'll have Frances Mays and Cyrus Cassels, who will be reading at the New Main Library. On the 15th, we'll have Shirley Kaufman. And we have a very special reading here in the reading room on the 2nd of April with Mark Arax and Victor Davis Hanson, who've written memoirs about the San Joaquin Valley here in California. And along with that, we'll have photographs by Matthew Black, who's done a lot of documentation work in the San Joaquin Valley. And those photographs will be on exhibit here in the Poetry Center. Next week, we will have off campus in the evening our annual Cindy Kolb AIDS Fund benefit reading at ODC, featuring Rebecca Brown and Thomas Avena. But today, I want to just talk a little bit about how this program fits into our series called Independence Days, which is part of our writing and community programs. Independent publishing has been a thriving outlet for writers in this country since first words were put to paper and that paper began to be sold. Independent publishers are those not affiliated with large corporations and those which are interested in the writings of people on the margins, or people not writing with the expectation of selling as many books as perhaps Danielle Steele or Stephen King. Independent publishers, although you could and you'd be really happy if you did, independent publishers provide a home for communities that have been left out of the so-called mainstream and communities whose words have been consistently dismissed or devalued in the open market. And that's one reason there are so many independent publishers who focus specifically on poetry, because poetry has not been seen to have universal appeal in the major market. And in that way, independent presses have helped keep poetry alive in this country. The same has been true for other communities which have been marginalized. In the early 70s, women writers began to establish their voices in the American literary world. And although we have a long tradition of American women writers, each one had been looked at as the exception, or someone who, in one manner or another, was not representative of what literature should be. So ways were continually found to dismiss the work of women writers. The author Joanna Russ has an entire book called How to Suppress Women's Writing. And it's all about the various methods that historically have been used to kind of diss women writers. In response to the emerging women's voices interested in talking about women, women's presses sprang up and provided a forum for these writers and their books. Presses like Persephone, Diana, Naiad, New Victoria, Sheba, Kitchen Table Women of Color. These are just a few that have come and some that have gone. Women writers have continued to turn to independent presses to place their work out in the world. People like Adrienne Rich, Audre Lorde, Dorothy Allison have always kept a home with the women's presses. Today we have two writers, Lucy Jane Bledsoe and Elana Dykewomon, whose work as women and as lesbians has been supported and promoted by women's presses. We also have here to facilitate the question and answer period Ruth Mahaney. Ruth is participating in this cycle of publishing from another area, that of book selling. Along with getting books printed comes getting books sold. And increasingly, independent bookstores have been crucial to getting those books out into the world. Ruth, who teaches here at San Francisco State in Women's Studies, is also a longtime community organizer, as well as one of the people who runs Modern Times Bookstore, a wonderful and progressive bookstore on Valencia Street in the Mission. Her extensive history with women's independent books and bookstores gives her a very helpful perspective for our discussion afterwards. So we have two readers who will bring us work that have been published by independent women's presses, one Press Gang, the other Seal Press. Our first reader will be Lucy Jane Bledsoe, whose first book of short stories, Sweat, was a Lambda Literary Award finalist. That collection was unique in its placement of women in a physical world, the world of athleticism and of sweat. Lucy has also written 2 novels for young people and been awarded a PEN Syndicated Fiction Award and a National Endowment for the Humanities Youth Grant and a Barbara Deming Money for Women grant. Her new novel, Working Parts, again explores the space that women occupy almost against the law. That is, a public physical space, a place of desire and a place of sport, the place where women live inside their bodies as well as their hearts. Please welcome Lucy Jane Bledsoe.
Good afternoon. How is everybody? Good. I really want to thank Jewel for setting this up, particularly with this focus on independent presses. I'm really pleased to be here representing an independent press, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer period afterwards. And pleased that Jewel organized it so well, bringing in Ruth, because it's such, I was saying when we were talking in the office a minute ago, it's such a huge topic, and for me such an emotional topic as an author that I think we need organization in talking about it. So I'm looking forward to that part of the afternoon. I'm going to read for about 20-25 minutes from my new novel, Working Parts. And this is a story that I like to think of as about 2 friendships and a few romances. The 2 central friendships in the book are between the narrator, whose name is Lori, and a man she works with in a bike repair shop. His name's Mickey Rodriguez, and that's the part I'm mainly going to read from today. And in the beginning of the book, they make a pact with one another. They admit, Lori admits to Mickey that she doesn't know how to read, and he admits to her, they're both in their late 20s, that he's never been in any kind of a sexual relationship. So they make a pact to overcome these obstacles in their lives. She's going to learn to read, and he's going to get in some sort of a romantic or sexual relationship. And I'm going to read the part where they make that pact so you'll understand better what's going on. The second relationship in the book is between Lori and the tutor she eventually gets, and you'll hear a little bit about that at the end of the part I read. So this is a little bit about Mickey and Lori's friendship. Mickey Rodriguez and I had been friends for 5 years. For as long as we had both worked at the bike shop. He thought he was straight, but I told him he couldn't know for sure because as I'd told Deidre Felix, my tutor, he had had zip for sexual experience. Mickey was in a car accident when he was 10 years old. It really tore up his face, which now, after the not-so-successful plastic surgery, seemed to be squished all to one side. The way the scars angled down his lips, he looked as if he had 2 big zippers across his mouth. Even his legs were permanently bent, slightly. He didn't quite limp, but being so skinny accentuated the unique angles in his body. I kept thinking he should change his name to Neil or Gary, something real masculine to make up for how vulnerable he looked. He was a great cyclist, in spite of his bent legs. A couple of months ago, Mickey and I told me that he'd gotten $65,000 from the car accident. His parents had invested it for him, and now it was more like $100,000. He wanted to open his own bike shop, and he wanted me to run it with him. Mickey must have seen the brief yes in my eyes. Besides being a good mechanic, I could sell anything. Whenever the people on the floor had a real hard customer, someone who was about to buy but just couldn't make the leap, they'd get me. Want to talk to one of our mechanics, they'd ask? She's an expert. She'll answer your questions more thoroughly than I can. 10 minutes later, the customer would be at the cash register, credit card in hand, often with an upgrade from the bike he or she had been considering. I could sell a high-fat diet to Susan Powder. I could sell pornography to Andrea Dworkin. Hell, if given a chance, I could probably sell homosexuality to Newt Gingrich. Mickey and I can make bundles of money. We both knew it. Before that yes reached my lips, though, another set of thoughts bombed my momentary enthusiasm. Enrique, the owner of the bike shop, was always reading through catalogs, writing up merchandise order forms, taking inventories. He was one of those guys who always had a pencil behind his ear. That's how much writing he did. I could talk fine, knew and used lots of big words, intelligent words, but I didn't like paperwork. Running a business took more than talking skills. I laughed at Mickey's offer, pretending I thought he was joking, and said, "Are you kidding? I'm definitely not management material. No way, not me, never. I don't want that kind of responsibility. I love repairing bicycles." Which was true, I do. I love working parts. A bicycle is the perfect machine. It's gorgeous, even drop-dead gorgeous. I was just happy to have a job that wasn't flipping hamburgers. I liked my life, it was easy, this was cool, I was just fine. Then there was the subterranean reality. I guess you could say that Mickey's offer sparked a crisis for me. I could read the newspaper comics, sure, one word at a time, slowly, like my sophomore high school teacher said, maybe at a third grade level. I could even make my way through most repair orders. Wheel, paint, chain, cog, spoke, brake, cable. These were familiar words to me. I'm not stupid. I catch on quick, I have to. It's sort of like how blind people can smell and hear real well. It's survival. Like if a repair order had me stumped, I'd wait until my hands were totally tied up, or I'd set myself up that way on purpose, then call over to Mickey. "Hey, Mick, take a look at that order on my table, will you? I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. Read it to me." Like I'd read it already and just spaced out. There are a million ways to get by. It's not that big a deal. Like the driver's test, I hustled the guy working the DMV test desk. I told him I'd forgotten my glasses and asked if I could take the test verbally. Then I told him I really liked the gold chains around his neck. Cracked some jokes about a couple other DMV employees who I could tell would put you over the edge if you work there, and got the guy to talk me right through the test. I'm telling you, it's easy. There's a way around everything. Like my father, I believed that reading was highly overrated. Voting? I voted for presidents. The rest hardly mattered. Or if there was some big proposition, I heard enough about it to know whether to vote yes or no. I watched a lot of television, which on the eve of the 21st century seemed like a perfectly adequate source of information. But having our own bike shop, that stopped me in my tracks. I wanted it so bad I had to sit down every time I thought about it. Me and Mickey together, what a dream. For a moment, I'd picture myself standing on the floor of a spanking new store, surrounded by gleaming racers and sturdy mountain bikes, a tidy repair room in the back, no Enrique, no boss at all, anywhere in sight. These thoughts brought on much more than that nervous hummingbird feeling, more like an eagle flapping frantically. I wanted that store. Mickey brought up the idea a couple more times, and I always laughed like he was out of his mind. "Don't even start," I told him the last time he tried to talk to me about it. The answer is no way, as in no fucking way. Then Mickey moped for 2 weeks. One of the things I love about Mickey is the way his twisted face looks when he smiles or laughs. It's like all the parts have to unfold and rearrange, and then there he is, all bright and crazy looking. When he mopes, it's the opposite. His whole face seems to slide even farther to the side. Finally, I figured out that he thought I didn't want to go into business with him. Only once had I voluntarily told someone I couldn't read. About a year before, I'd tried to tell a woman I was dating. She refused to believe me, and to prove her point, gave me 3 thick books for my birthday, commenting that if you had some good books, you would read. Then she goaded me to read them until I broke up with her. I didn't want to lose Mickey, though, and I couldn't stand him thinking I was rejecting him. So one evening, as we rode our bikes up Spruce Street after work, I said, "Mick, you know it's not that I don't want to have a bike shop with you, don't you?" "I thought we dropped that topic," he said. A beat-up Toyota pickup took a right turn, cutting in front of Mickey, who extended his middle finger at the driver. Flipping off motorists is dangerous. It took Mickey years to break me of the habit, so I knew he was beyond sullen. He was really hurting, which made me feel like a shit. I waited a second to make sure the Toyota driver wasn't going to circle back and run us down, then said, "I just don't feel like I'd be any good at being in charge of something, anything." Mickey didn't answer. He thought I was making excuses. I kept trying. "Open your bike shop. I'll work there. I'll be in charge of repairs." We reached the reservoir at the top of Spruce and headed up Grizzly Peak. If we really moved, we could do the Pinehurst Loop and make it back by dark. Then I got annoyed. "Why are you pouting about this? So what if I don't want to run a bike shop?" "I don't believe you, that's why," Mickey shouted back to me and picked up our pace. "I know you'd love it. You could sell bikes so fast we couldn't keep them stocked. Besides, you know and love bikes down to every last ball bearing. And you do too like being in charge. You love power." So it is about me. I braked so hard my rear tire popped off the pavement, heaving me toward the handlebars. I held on and steadied my bike as the tire bounced down again. I put both feet on the ground. Mickey, still pedaling, turned and looked at me. "What are you doing?" he yelled back. "Listen to me," I demanded, then waited for Mickey to turn around and pedal back to me. He stopped, the front tire of his bike touching the front tire of mine like a kiss. The funniest thing about this was that I probably trusted Mickey more than I trusted anyone in my life, which was pretty funny when you figured he wasn't family, he wasn't a woman, he probably wasn't even queer. Yet something fell away inside me and I didn't feel afraid to tell him, "Mick, I can't read. How could I help run a business?" "What do you mean you can't read?" "Paper words, me, we don't get along." He blinked a few times and scowled. I could see his mind working back, trying to think of what he said jived with his experience of me. His thin chest rose and fell as he caught his breath. "Wow," he finally said. And I could tell he believed me. "When did you—" He stopped when he couldn't find the words to go on. I laughed. "When did I not learn to read?" "Who knows." "Are you dyslexic?" he asked. "Oh, I don't know," I said. I hated that word. Teachers had used it over the years, usually before they ran me through tests. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. My guess was that there are a million reasons I couldn't read, including how no one figured out I needed glasses until the 4th grade, how much we moved and changed schools, how my father scoffed at reading, how the goal in school was to hustle the teacher, not read the books. I had my explanations, but they seem beside the point now. So I stroked the inside curve of my handlebars and said nothing more. Mickey didn't say anything either, but when I looked up, he had a pleased, half smile on his face. I realized that for Mickey, the revelation that I couldn't read was secondary to his new understanding that I hadn't been rejecting him. Later, I wished he had rushed in with judgments and denials and all that stuff most people did, because his nutty smile and the relief in his eyes that our friendship hadn't suffered a break of trust caused me to make my biggest mistake. I said, "I guess you kind of touched a nerve with this bike shop idea. I mean, I sometimes wonder what it would be like if I could do anything I wanted, if I could read. But just thinking about it gives me this hummingbird feeling in my chest, all panicky." "Really?" he said thoughtfully. "That's how I feel when I think about kissing a woman." "Nah," I barked. "Kissing a woman? Give me a break. That's nothing. Smack, you do it." Damn, now who was the insensitive one? I sounded just like my ex-girlfriend with her thick books. "So that's what I say about reading," Mickey snapped back. "You open a book, open your eyes, there, the word smack, you read. What's the big deal?" Okay, so I'd hurt his feelings, and now he'd hurt mine. We were even. "Let's go," I said, and took off up the hill, pedaling fast. Suddenly, I wanted to get away from Mickey, but he stayed right on my back wheel. "I'll make you a deal," he called out. "You learn to read, and I'll kiss a woman." "You're crazy," I said. "No, I'm serious," Mickey yelled. I tried to ride faster, knowing that I could never ride faster than Mickey, knowing that no matter what, Mickey would always be right on my back wheel, right there, riding with me, which was a scary thought, now that he knew everything. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here and read a very short scene, pretty short scene, where Lori has gotten a tutor. She's beginning to work with the tutor, and she's had her first success with the tutor. She had described to her, her tutor's name is Deidre Felix, and she had described to her that she had seen this incredible bird and plant at the coast, and the bird turned out to be a peregrine falcon, and the plant turned out to be an artichoke plant, but her tutor had made her look up this plant and this animal in the library. And what's happened to Lori, too, is she just, I'm sorry, I'm sort of stuttering here, as a way to get Lori into the library, because anyone who's going to identify a plant or a bird is going to go look at the pictures, right, and then read the text. So Lori realizes her tutor found this way to get her into a library without humiliating her, and has a newfound respect for the woman who she was very embattled with in the beginning. So she has no one she can tell this new success to except Mickey, so she runs to find him. I drove straight to the ice rink with my 2 books. I felt crummy about the rejection from Pam, a woman, librarian she was trying to get a date with. But not that crummy. Persistence is the key to successful dating. I enjoyed a challenge, and I'd be back. Besides, I had this crazed feeling about the falcon and artichoke, like they were almost more important than a hot babe in a miniskirt. What was happening to me? All I knew was that I had to know everything about that bird and plant tonight. I knew Mickey would read the material to me, and I knew he would be at the ice rink. A couple of days ago, I'd asked him if he wanted to ride after work. He'd said, "It's going off daylight savings time soon. We won't be able to ride after work." "That's no answer, Mickey," I said. "I'm talking about tonight. There's plenty of light." He shrugged, not to get very far. "Any ride is better than none." He was silent. I got it. He was going to the ice rink. "If you have a date with Sheila," he snapped, as if I'd called her a dirty name. "Sorry, Sheila then. Just say I have a date with Sheila. I can't ride tonight." "Because I don't have a date with Sheila." "Then come ride with me." I grinned, trying to be my jaunty self, but my grin felt like a jack-o'-lantern's, hollow and glowing with only a small flame. "I'm going skating," Mickey said. "You're going skating to see Sheila." "I'm going skating to skate. Sheila may or may not be there." Romance sure brings out strange things in people's personalities, I thought. My friend Edith vaporizes like it's just too potent for her, but Mickey, I'd never considered how love might affect him. I knew how in general he could be a romantic fool, but sneaky and indirect? That had never been his way. He didn't have to lie to me about wanting to be with Sheila. I wasn't going to get in his way. Fine, go to the ice rink, I'd thought that night. I'm perfectly happy riding by myself. Tonight, though, I needed Mickey. The ice rink was packed full of young kids and teenagers. Why was Mickey hanging out here? Adult men were supposed to meet women in bars or maybe in a biking club. Or even a customer. Mickey could have cruised a customer and talked himself into a date. I should have introduced him to some straight friend, some straight adult friend. I didn't like the idea of my best friend hanging out nightly at an ice rink. I crawled up in the bleachers, sat down, and watched the skaters, looking for him. There he was. I had no idea Mickey could skate so well. He held hands with a hefty girl who had lots of dark freckles and short brown hair, so tightly curled it seemed to cinch her head. She also skated well. They were flushed, skating fast, their arms swinging in sync. Lots of the other skaters watched them like they were the main attraction, the act to copy. Mickey spoke to the girl, and a moment later their legs, his thin and bent, hers stocky, instantly changed direction in unison. They were good. I wondered if the girl's parents knew where she was. The pair skated toward me, and I scrambled down the bleachers to the rink side. I arranged my face in a first meeting kind of smile and called out, "Hey, Mickey!" They sprayed ice in my face as they skidded to a graceful stop only a few feet away. The girl let go of his hand, and he slipped it in his pocket as if he wanted to protect where she had touched him. Both were solemn, unsmiling, as if skating were holy. I realized that Mickey hadn't heard or seen me, had no idea I was even there. A moment later, he took off, leaving Sheila balancing on her skate blades, her knees touching her feet splayed. From where I stood, I could see she hadn't a wrinkle on her round, delighted face. She pressed her rosy lips together and watched Mickey adoringly as he skated away, made a lovely figure-8 turn, then shot back toward her fast, his hair flying out behind him. Another spray of ice, and he stopped inches from her, his thin chest almost touching her substantial one. He giggled. Oh, God, I thought, Mickey's in love. I'm going to read one last section. They both start to get in a bit of trouble. You can see the kind of trouble that Mickey's getting into. And this is halfway through the book or so, where Lori goes to ballet with her tutor, and she's beginning to realize that her tutor is in some kind of trouble too, but she's not exactly sure what the trouble is. So the first part of this section, she's at the ballet with her tutor, and then the second part of the section, they're in her tutor's study, and this is a place that used to frighten her a lot, but as she's gets more comfortable, she's starting to sort of like it. And the final part of this section, she's in Mickey's apartment, where she goes once again to try to tell him about one of her successes, starting out at the ballet with her tutor, Deidre Felix. Deidre Felix wore a purple silk pantsuit and a white blouse. She looked nice, especially compared to the other women at Davies Hall who wore furs, silver lame gowns. I swear I even saw one woman wearing a tiara. "You didn't tell me Lady Di would be here," I whispered to Deidre Felix, and she laughed out loud. I had on my best pants, black chinos, and a silky-looking polyester shirt from the 70s. The pointed collar, about 6 inches long, was nearly in style again, but not in this crowd. Deidre Felix knew some people, and she introduced me as her friend. I had permanent bike grease under my fingernails, so I just nodded and said, "Pleased to meet you," and pretended I didn't see their extended hands. "Here's your program," she said, handing me a folded piece of paper as we took our seats. I held it carefully. "Arnie on a business trip?" I asked about her husband, petting the burgundy velvet upholstery on the arm of my chair. "No." I guess doctors don't go on business trips, I said, trying to extend the conversation. She was silent. I sighed loud enough for her to hear. I happened to have gotten myself into deep trouble in order to escort her to the ballet. Maybe she didn't think of it as me escorting her, but she didn't have to be so uncommunicative. Soon the lights went down and the orchestra launched into the first number. I had seen ballet on television, but I had never been to a live dance performance. I expected to see featherweight femmes in tutus with gay boys carrying them around the stage. But for the first number, the dancers wore street clothes, sharp 1940s suits and dresses, and the men danced as much, if not more, than the women. Their movements were so fluid, so sensual, watching them made me feel as if a riptide were sucking me under the surface. I knew I would want to tell Whitney, this is the woman she's dating now, all about this, but because of the way I had broken our date, I was not going to be able to brag about having been at the ballet. She had been displeased, to say the least. We had plans to go with Joy, her roommate from Oberlin, and her girlfriend to a movie. I had resisted hanging out with Joy or any of Whitney's other Oberlin friends. I guess I'd been sort of afraid of them, so my agreeing to that movie date had been a big deal, which was probably why I blanked out on it when I told Deidre Felix I could go to the ballet. I don't know why I hadn't just told Whitney that a cousin of my mother's had come to town unexpectedly, something excusable like that. When it came to Deidre Felix, I just couldn't lie. The best I could do was tell Whitney something important came up, which sounded suspicious at best. I planned to tell Whitney all about Deidre Felix and the literacy program. Eventually, even soon. On good days, I looked forward to it. I even fantasized how Whitney could help me with my lessons. I needed a little more time, though. I'd tell her, but not yet. The dancers flew onto the stage in sweats for the second piece, which was my favorite, and in army fatigues for the third one. They told stories with their bodies, whole stories about blood, muscles, sweat, and heat. I sat gripping the program with my hands, feeling as if my own blood was sloshing in unison with their movements. The dancers gave me a deep kind of knowledge, a very new and a very old knowledge. One I felt vibrating in my whole body, even my little toes. By the time we left Davies Hall, I was skin filled with helium. Deidre Felix walked slowly like she was tired, but I had trouble keeping my feet on the ground. I opened the car door for her as I had quit doing for Practical Whitney, and Deidre Felix smiled and said, "Thank you." When we got out of the car at her house, I wanted to hug her before getting into my own car and driving home. I didn't know what it was, but it was there, the way I felt sometimes in her study, where she loosened, became someone other than my teacher as she read stories out loud. I did not hug her. Even if I'd had the nerve, I didn't have the time. She shot into her house. When I got home, I put the ballet program on the floor next to my bed. I'd made sure not to fold or wrinkle it. I bet she would have me read the program at our next meeting. That was the kind of thing she did. The thing was, I wanted to read it. However, Deidre Felix did not have me read the ballet program at our next meeting. In fact, she didn't want me to read anything at all that week. After we got comfortable in her study, she began reading out loud right away. I was disappointed. My progress was nothing to her, a handful of words, but it had begun to feel significant to me. I wanted to try reading the ballet program. "This book is called Written on the Body," she said. "It's by Jeanette Winterson. She's another lesbian author, British, very different from Rita Mae Brown." She had just finished reading me Ruby Fruit Jungle, which I had loved. There was no fire this week. Hadn't been in a while. These days, Deidre Felix usually opened the window onto her garden where I could watch hummingbirds, some with glossy ruby throats and others with green satin backs, hovering over her flowers. "You don't mind reading lesbian authors?" I asked. "Why should I mind? Some people are homophobic." She shrugged as if she had about 100 more important things to think about than homophobia. I laughed out loud, liking Deidre Felix and wanting to ask what were those other things she had to think about. I had that feeling again of wanting to sit close to her. I even had begun liking this intense study. It was as if every atom packed a bigger wallop than atoms anywhere else. When I was in Deidre Felix's study, I longed for the most unusual things, like wanting to sit close to this woman who was better than twice my age, my teacher, like actually wondering what stories the other books, the ones she was not reading to me, told. She began reading from the Jeanette Winterson book. "Why is the measure of love loss? It hasn't rained for 3 months. The trees are prospecting underground, sending reserves of roots into the dry ground, roots like razors to open any artery water fat." As I listened, a breeze came in the window, reminded me of that day at the coast last fall when I had seen the artichoke plant in Peregrine Falcon. The words Deidre Felix read seemed to get lifted on the breeze and carried out the window. They had an energy, those words, like the dancers' bodies, a flow, a swishing. And I thought, I am learning to read. No one knew but me, not even Deidre Felix, but I realized in that moment that I really was learning. Reading was not words and books. It was movement, rhythm, waves of energy between me and the world, like a breeze or a dancer. The words in the books were just the working parts. Deidre Felix read as if I weren't there, as if reading were a journey. I wondered which she loved most, books or the ballet. When she finally finished, she shut the book and put it on the table. "Did you enjoy the ballet?" she asked. I flushed. I hadn't even thanked her. Inside, I was still soaring, and yet I had not told her. Yeah, I said, it was great. Really cool. I liked it a lot. All the words about the breeze, the dancers, books, and energy backed up in my throat. It's kind of like repairing bikes, I tried. She looks quizzical, and I couldn't explain, so I left quickly, too excited to stay. I drove straight to Mickey's. I pounded on his door, waited about 3 seconds, then pounded some more. I knew he was in there because his truck was out front. Finally, I flipped through the keys on my key ring, looking for the one to his apartment that he had once given me so I could feed his cat while he was out of town. "Hey," Mickey shouted from the bedroom as I entered the apartment. "Who is it?" He sounded panicked. "Mickey," I yelled, "it's me. I didn't think you were home." I lied. "What are you doing?" he demanded, coming from the bedroom, shirtless, barefoot, and wearing jeans with the fly open. "Who said you could just break into my apartment?" I had never seen the long, ragged scar just above his left nipple. Sheila trailed out of the bedroom with that same flower print dress pulled on crooked. Mickey collapsed in a kitchen chair. "Damn it, Lori." I looked at Sheila and wondered again if her parents knew where she was. Lost my place. She moved behind Mickey, placed a hand on his thin shoulder. One finger stroked his skin. "I better get home," she said. "No," Mickey said to her, then asked me, "What do you want?" "Listen to this," I said, undaunted by his displeasure in seeing me, his fear, Sheila's presence. I opened a cupboard and pulled out a can of soup. "Okay, watch," I said, feeling like a magician. Campbell's," I sounded out slowly. Tomato. I giggled, dropped the soup can, and grabbed the T-shirt tossed on a kitchen chair. I held it up and read, "Just do it. Shit, that's an easy one. Give me another." Mickey was looking at me like I was crazy. "You don't understand, Mick. I'm getting it. Decoding words is just like repairing a bike. You take the parts apart, and then you figure out how they go back together again. And then you have the ride." I found a tissue box and started in on it. Introducing a new softer tissue. "Do you hear me, Mickey? Do you get it?" "Who is this Miguel?" Sheila asked. Mickey, or I guess he was Miguel now, at least to Sheila, wiped his face with both hands. "It's Lori," he said, "my coworker." "I'm his best friend," I told the girl. "He's forgotten, but believe me, he will remember one day." Now Mickey looked directly at me, and he had a double expression on his face. I could see he wanted me gone instantly, but a feeling of responsibility, maybe even caring, nagged behind his aggravation, enough to make him say, "Okay, Lori, that's great. You can read the soup can." "And the T-shirt, and the tissue box. I'm saying I'm learning to read. I can't read, but I get it. I get the feeling of reading. It's rhythm like music, energy like dance." I must have looked psycho. My synapses were snapping and popping like I'd just inhaled a couple hits of acid. Sheila slipped out the door, and Mickey said, "Shit, she can't walk home alone at night." He pulled on the "Just Do It" T-shirt, grabbed his keys off the coffee table, and chased after her. He yelled, "Lock up when you leave." "Zip up your fly," I called after him. Naturally, I would have liked a little more attention from Mickey, but mostly I had needed a witness to make myself believe it. I locked up his apartment and drove home fast. When I got there, I opened the tiny fridge and read the tortilla package. I pulled off the T-shirt I wore and read the label. I read the little tag hanging off the electrical cord on my blow dryer. I looked at an envelope from the DMV sitting on the counter, tore it open, and looked at the jumble of words. That stopped me. The hummingbird came back. I could not read anything in that letter. It was too black and white, too long. I opened my cottage door and breathed in the vanilla jasmine. The air was cold now, cold and dark. I sat in one of the Adirondack chairs wearing just my bra and jeans and wondered if Deidre Felix had gone to bed or if she were up reading. I imagined her reading and reading and reading all night long. When she wasn't with me or at the ballet, I thought she read. I took another deep breath and realized I was still holding the letter from the DMV. I thought of the dancers. I thought of Deidre Felix's garden. I thought of Mary Tallmountain and Rita Mae Brown and Jeanette Winterson, the way their words sang. I thought again of Deidre Felix and knew she'd become as essential to me as air. Thank you.
Thank you. Elana Dykewomon's book, Riverfinger Women, was one of the early classics of the women's movement. She has since published 4 other books, including her most recent historical novel, Beyond the Pale, which was nominated for an American Library Association award. In one of her poems from the collection, Nothing is as Sweet as the Taste, Elana writes, quote, "Experience was supposed to be our friend, and we learn, but as we learn, we get worn away." For any writer trying to create against the tides of ignorance and sexism and anti-Semitism and heterosexism, name an ism, and it'll be existing in the publishing world. For any writer trying to create and not get worn away is a major accomplishment. To not be worn down and worn out so that bitterness and anger deflate your vision and dull your words. After years of writing and teaching, Elana Dykewomon continues to reach for the sharp and shining places in her work. The historical novel is only as good as its characters as its words. In Beyond the Pale, we have a fresh piece of historical literature from a perspective very rarely shown in our literature. Words that are not worn away, words that are sharp, words that are touching. Please welcome Elana Dykewomon.
Thank you, Jewel. That was wonderful. Wonderfully said. And thank you, Lucy. I loved hearing your reading. And I'm very pleased to be here at the Poetry Center this afternoon. Because it is the Poetry Center, I thought I'd read a very short poem from my book, the title poem, Nothing Will Be as Sweet as the Taste. This was also published by a small press in England, in London, Only Women Press, which has been in existence for about 20 years. And this book came out in 1995. If you were my home, I would be your garden. If I was your garden, I would want you to cultivate me, to plant, water, weed, harvest, and like I promised, I would feed you. You can always eat what straggles up or what's gone to seed, but nothing will be as sweet as the taste of the woman you tended purposefully. Beyond the Pale is a long book, as you can see. It took me 10 years to write it. So I'm not going to skip around. I'm going to read just from one section. It's an ancestor book, not about my specific blood relations, but about recovering the Jewish lesbians who came before us, ordinary women and political activists whose lives can give us courage and hope. The voice of one of the main characters, Hava Meyer, came to me in the form of a poem in 1987, and the book started as an attempt to find out who she was. As soon as her life started to take shape, many other women appeared who also had something to say. The section I'm about to read takes place on the Lower East Side in late 1905. Hava Meyer saw her parents killed in the Kishinev pogrom of 1903 and has emigrated to New York with her Odessa cousins, the Petrovskys. In this scene, she's 16 and she works as a tobacco stripper. Her cousin Rose, with whom she's shared a bed for the last 2 years, is 15 and a seamstress. Bina, who does piecework at home, is Rose's mother and was Hava's mother's half-sister. Aaron and Harry are Rose's brothers. One of my concerns in writing Beyond the Pale, among many, was to show how poetry was part of the daily life and imaginations of regular folks. So I'm going to start with a short reflective section that leads into the dialogue and action of the scene. This is in Hava Meyer's voice. Sometimes I'd find myself scribbling down a few lines. I thought of them as pictures. From my entire childhood in Kishinev, what did I have? One photograph. But if I could make an outline of someone with words, I'd be able to hold them in my memory. I wouldn't always live with the Petrovskys I knew. From time to time, I would be struck with the desire not to forget, a gesture, the way the circles of gaslight reflected a small bit of red in Aunt Bina's hair. In Russia, revolution. In New York, sewing machines on layaway. Late, even my aunt would sometimes stop stitching when she thought we were asleep, looking around guilty, frowning, would sigh, pick up the Jewish Daily Forward, and read. Aunt Bina, did you see this headline? I asked, pulling the newspaper from under a pile of ribbons. No, Aaron or Ephraim left it here. I've been too busy with this trimming to look. That must be what had the streets in such a commotion, Rose said, looking over my shoulder. What is it? Bina turned towards us for the first time since we'd come in, troubled. I pointed to a column halfway down the page. There was a pogrom in Odessa. The revolution is crushed. No, in Odessa, what else does it say? The Tsar was only pretending to give in to the cry for reform. He unleashed the forces of the netherworld. There were attacks everywhere, as if by prearranged signal. Jews and the intelligentsia are the chief targets. In Odessa, estimated losses in the millions of rubles, over 200 dead, 3,000 homeless. 200 dead. Aunt Bina put the trousers down. She looked around the tenement room at the air shaft window where moldy dust clung like carpeting, the piles of sewing and rags, a rabble shouting for attention. She put a hand over her face. Rose and I had come home for a quick dinner before night school. Now Rose put her arms around her mother, her head on Bina's shoulder. I could see them looking together at their friends, their relatives, their old streets, their synagogue, the Alte Chaim. They got out. When Mama and Papa were killed, Aunt Bina decided it was time. How can you know when to leave? Sometimes you know, but how? My sister Esther stayed as if it were still possible to make an ordinary life in Russia. Everyone acts as if death happens to someone else. Even if it happened to your half-sister, was that enough to make you give up everything, flee the country where you were born? What made Aunt Bina know that bribes would be useless when the mobs came? Bina had said to Isidore, I don't care about the shop, the garden, the house, we have to go. Out of Russia, away from Odessa with its great opportunities for Jews. Rose never saw a pogrom, she said. God willing, she'll never have to. Rose looked at her mother, then at me. I looked away. She never saw a pogrom, but I... Suddenly I felt as if my heart was a pile of broken rock dropping through my stomach into my shoes. I could see my yellow-stained hands gripping the back of a chair, my knuckles turning white. Bina gestured Rose over to me. Rose took my hand. I could feel the calluses on her fingertips from sewing, the softness of her palm, but I couldn't respond. Rose pulled up a chair and sat down beside me, stroking the back of my hand, humming very quietly the folk song, What a Beautiful Night. An old love song seemed an odd choice. Then I heard the melody for the lyrics, I swear I'll never forget you unto death. Did my mother still remember me? Was she humming like Rose somewhere above us while she stitched the evening onto clouds with her mother and her mother before her? My mother was so sweet. When my stomach hurt, she'd bring me a plate of hot soup. I sucked in my cheeks and closed my eyes. Tears came anyway, but I held my breath so as to make no sound. Rose got another chair, pushed me into it gently, her hands on my shoulders. I put my head against Rose's belly and shook. Rose gathered me in her arms, humming still. Bina lit the gas stove to heat water. Rose smoothed my hair. Maybe tonight we should skip class. We could rest. It wouldn't be a sin, she said after a while. I looked up at Rose and then sat straight. Although she had poured herself around me like honey, her forehead was creased, and I could see fear flickering behind her face. I noticed she'd torn one of her fingernails to the quick, and it was bleeding a little. No, tonight of all nights we should go. There'll be news from Odessa, and we can see if there are words in English for these things. English, Yiddish, Russian. How many languages do you need to say anti-Semite? Bina said through clenched teeth, pouring tea into glasses for us, with lumps of sugar to suck on the side. Then there's a brief scene at night school from Rose's point of view. Where she's looking around and people are asking how you say coward and murderer and reactionary in English, and she's admiring how strong Hava is and sort of showing that she's beginning to have a little crush on her. Then they return from night school. Rose and I were allowed to close the door to our room because of Leon's presence, a boarder, a grown man, not just family, in the house. I sat fiddling with the laces of my boots. Tell me what you're thinking about, Chava, Rose asked. Usually I said nothing or just how work was today. But Rose kept asking anyway. I guess she was lonely for a better conversationalist, and every once in a while I tried to do my part. That night it wasn't too hard. I was thinking about someone I met in Odessa. Someone I knew? Rose stretched to unbutton her skirt at the side. I don't think you would know her. On the train from Kishinev, I was sitting next to my mother's midwife, Gutki. Do you remember when you met me at the station? They were there? Who? Gutki and Dovid. I noticed I was lacing my shoes back up. No, I don't remember. Did you know them well? Hardly at all, though probably she came to our shul. I only remembered Gutki a little from Sarah's being born, but my mother said if it wasn't for Gutki, I would have killed her for not wanting to come out. I was born feet first and stubborn, she said. She was right, absolutely right. Rose was folding her shirtwaist against her body. She came and sat beside me in her slip and corset. I turned and knocked my knuckles against Rose's freckled shoulder. She hit me with a pillow. You don't understand what I'm saying, I whined. How can I understand what you're saying if you don't say anything? Help me undo this corset, will you? I felt awkward, even though I'd done it 100 times, and she noticed. What is it, Chava? The man who was with Gutki, the one you met at the train station? Yes, you don't remember? Why should I? Because he wasn't a man. I cleared my throat. What do you mean he wasn't a man? What should he be, a dog? Everything has to be a joke by you. Look who's talking. All right, I'm listening. So you met a man who wasn't a man. You have to admit, it sounds like the beginning of a riddle. I think it is a riddle. Her easiness made it easier for me. I pried my boots off. I give up already. So what was he? A woman. He was a woman dressed to look like a man. Really? You know for sure? She rose and put all her clothes in the bureau carefully, smoothing them out before she closed the drawer. I think so. I remember when we first got to the station, Gutki called him Dovida, but Dovid in front of you. And then Gutki winked at me. Yes, I'm sure it was a woman. I stared at a stain on the wall just to the right of Rose's shoulder. I figured I should have been undressing too, but I couldn't seem to make a move off the edge of the bed. What a scandal. I never heard of such a thing. No, me either. That's why no one notices, I guess. They can't imagine it. Why would a woman do that? Rose asked. I don't know, maybe if she wanted to travel alone safely, or if she wanted to be a bricklayer. A bricklayer? What girl wants to be a bricklayer? She's going to dress like a man. She could want to be something better, a rabbi at least. Rabbis have to have full beards, I said. Maybe she wanted to be a student at the university. But wasn't she old? All right, maybe a university teacher or a grain trader. Men can go anywhere they please to do business. Would you dress up like a man to do business? Rose was studying me, her hands on her hips. For some reason, I noticed that where her shoulder met her body, there was a little bulge of fat, just enough to curl a hand around. I don't know. I never thought of it before then. I thought maybe in Odessa all kinds of strange things could be ordinary. But I never saw anyone else like that while we were there, at least that I could tell. I never heard about such a thing even here in New York. Rose put her foot on the bottom drawer and rolled her stocking down slowly, as if she were studying each hair on her leg. Maybe it's something they don't tell us about because they think we're still children. Mama and Papa talk about everything with us. They think they're very modern. We shouldn't be ashamed of our minds or our bodies, they say. I don't think it's something they ever thought of either. She switched legs and rolled the other stocking off quickly. Well, maybe if no one can think of it, it would make it easy for them to stay invisible, keep out of the way. Oh, you're worried for them. Rose sat back beside me, putting her arm through mine. Aren't you worried for the girls you knew in Odessa? Of course. Rose frowned, puzzled. I know I should be more upset, but Odessa seems so far away now, and the girls I knew... She moved her head from side to side. I can only pray that God has been merciful to them and to all the family we left behind. She paused, staring into the air, then she looked back at me. Aren't you getting undressed tonight? Yes, I started to undo my shirtwaist. Goodkey's probably fine. Yes, probably. Rose started to say something else, stopped, started again. Do you like being a girl, Hava? Girl? I don't feel like a girl. I know, you're all grown up in Syria, studying so you can get out of tobacco. What I mean is, would you rather have been a boy? I looked at my hands, the way the yellow stains spread like an old map into the creases. How can I know that? I could earn more money. The boys at my factory earn 50 cents a day more for doing the exact same thing I do. You think that's something? In garments, only the men can be cutters, and some of them make $25 a week. You think that's hard to do? They should do what I do. But they get $10 more than the most experienced woman. They have families, though. And what? We have no obligations? We get to spend all our money on fancy waists with ribbons? So maybe you're the one who'd like to be a boy. Finally, I got my shirtwaist off and stood to step out of my skirt. Rose laughed. No, boys, I've had enough of them in my own house. You see how Mama spoils Harry, even when she knows he's taking advantage. And Aaron's so full of himself. Who wants to be like that? She made a sour face for a second. There's only one thing boys can do I wish I could. Oh, I smiled at her, turning the gas jets down after putting my clothes away. What's that? Kiss you. I froze, my back to her for what seemed forever. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you, she said. I was just teasing. I turned around. Even in the shadows, I could see her face was pink with blushing, her blue eyes glittering as though wet. Hava, I'm sorry, all right? Don't be sorry. Just tell me the truth. Did you mean it? Yes. Rose took a deep breath. I took one too, sitting down beside her. I also want to kiss you. I had the sensation of being on the sea again, pitch and roll, moving inside a different element, not attached to the earth anymore. Rose leaned towards me, put her hand on my cheek to turn my face so we could see each other in the light that came from the street. I was worried looking at her, at the olive of her face, but Rose appeared happy. So if you want to, and I want to, who starts? I pulled the tenement air down to the bottom of my lungs. This was harder than going out on strike. I moved my lips onto Rose's. Together. We had been lying in bed together for more than 2 years. Careful, cousins, left side, right side, I'm worn out, me too, good night. No, I changed my mind as the kiss engulfed our faces and my hands found the soft flesh of her shoulders and pressed her close. This was easier than going on strike. This was easier than anything.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Ruth Mahaney to join us, and she'll kind of start the questions off and kind of put everything in a context for us. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Wonderful readings. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. I'm trying to talk about women and small presses, and that's the discussion I want that we're going to be having. But in thinking, someone said, well, what makes a small press? What's a small press, and what's the difference? So I thought maybe I should talk about that for a minute before we actually try to discuss it. And I realized that it's a lot easier to talk about what a small press is not than what it is. So I'm going to do that for a minute. What is a large press? What is a not small press? Most of the big presses are subsidiaries of multinational corporations. And just an example, Avon is on, I mean, if you notice who publishes the books you read, and notice that, I hope that after today you will be always looking and seeing who publishes what you read. But Avon, for example, is a very big press. They're owned by Hearst. HarperCollins is owned by Robert Murdoch. And Murdoch, incidentally, just to tell you, give you a clue of where I'm going with this, is recently you might have read that Murdoch was in the press because he was being talked about in the news. First of all, they're a huge communications giant, and they are trying to go for the communications networks in mainland China. HarperCollins was about to publish a book critical of mainland China, and Rupert Murdoch canceled it. So a lot of people are really upset about this because it's sort of the epitome of what's wrong with multinational corporations running publishing houses. But so a lot of some authors that usually are published by HarperCollins are refusing to do any more work for them, like Doris Lessing and possibly some others as well. So there's sort of a campaign about this issue. Simon & Schuster is owned by Viacom, Gulf and Western. Warner and Little Brown are owned by Time Warner. Bantam Doubleday Dell, which is the result of several mergers that happen, is owned by something called Bertelsmann, which is a large German corporation. So some of our presses are owned by large multinationals from other countries as opposed to ours. Another little thing, Hyperion, which looks like a small press. It publishes mostly children's books and stuff, but it's owned by Walt Disney, which is also owned by Time Warner. And so what it ends up publishing when you really look at its list is that it's publishing books that go with the movies that Walt Disney does. So you have all these kids, Little Mermaid and stuff. Another example of the impact of some of this, one of the obvious things is that large presses are hugely capitalized and small presses are not. So that one of the big fundamental differences is the amount of capitalization that goes in. So that a large company can afford to lose money on a title and just sort of shift money from somewhere else. But another impact is that they put their managers that are sort of managers of money-making, they see it as another profit center, this publishing house. It's a profit center. Books are products. And so they put their guys who know how to manage profit centers in charge of publishing houses. And one publicized in the book trade that we were all quite amused by was one guy who worked for Rupert Murdoch said, we seem to be selling a lot by this Richard Wright guy. Let's get some more from him. He, of course, is no longer alive. But the impacts of this kind of approach, you can certainly see what the opposite of that would be in small presses, that small presses, first of all, the people who are involved with them really are book people, and they really care about getting ideas out there, which is not at all the motives for the large corporations. It may be the motives for individual editors, which creates sort of a contradiction sometimes in the large corporations, but it's not the motive often of the company as a whole, and so they make decisions that are sometimes not in our interest as readers. HarperCollins just canceled 200 contracts that they had already signed because they just decided they didn't want to put that kind of money into that part of their conglomerate at that moment because they had something else they wanted to invest in instead. The small presses don't have stockholders usually, or certainly not stockholders that are on the main stock market. They are, another word for them I think is independent, that they're not parts of huge conglomerates. They, I think, are really authentically about trying to make ideas available. And another side effect of the way that large corporations run is 98% of the people who make the decisions in those corporations are white, fairly wealthy men. And so the kinds of people that they are interested in publishing are very often, and the kinds of people that they end up putting in charge of projects are very rarely going to be people of color or people who have a clue about certainly feminist issues, but also about how a lot of people live who don't have a lot of money. So those interests are not things that they know much about. They also don't know how to market books to those people. That those people might be into reading. One example is that Susie Bright, for example, who's somebody who started writing with Claes Press, which is a small press, and got very popular. It's quite popular, and this is happening sometimes, that small presses will publish people, get them popular, show that there's a market, which all the women's presses have done, is show that there in fact is a market for these kinds of books, and then the large presses will come in and pick up a book or pick up a title that's already been made popular, and they'll then publish it in a whole different way. Well, Simon & Schuster came and picked up Susie Bright, and they didn't have a clue. They just thought it was sex, and they could market sex to all those people out there, sort of. And they didn't have a clue how to market it, how to, package it or anything. And the book has not been a success. It's their first book that isn't. So it's like, they really don't have a clue about the people that small presses end up knowing a lot about. Claes understood Susie Bright very well and understood the people who really wanted to read her work. Anyway, I will stop there except with a little quote that freedom of the press belongs to she who owns one, which is an old quote that I remember very well from the 60s, which is a lot of small presses, certainly small presses have been going for a long time, but the women's presses particularly kind of picked up on a kind of underground press, underground newspapers that were being published, and actually the women who, here in the Bay Area, who started the Women's Press Collective, Wendy Cadden, Pat Parker, Judy Grawn, Willis Kim, Martha Shelley, there may have been others, that they actually, a couple of them went to the East Coast and apprenticed under a group called the New England Free Press, which used to publish all kinds of little pamphlets on newsprint and sell them for like 35 cents. The first issue of Our Bodies Ourselves, for example, was published by them on newsprint and cost 35 cents. They went and apprenticed themselves and learned how to print, how to use a printing press, and then they came back and started the Women's Press Collective and started publishing some of the first early women's work that no one else was publishing. So I would like to ask both of you sort of what your experience in getting published, and I know Elana has early 70s experience with her first book from Daughters Press, and sort of what your experience has been in getting published, and then if you have anything to say about small press, big press, etc. So, Elana, you want to start with your 70s, perhaps?
I was very lucky in 1973. I had written a book when I was 21, just out of college, because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I wrote it in about a month, as opposed to this one, which took me 10 years. So it's a big range there. I don't want to exactly attribute speed to it, but it was easier. I didn't have to do any research. Anyway, I wrote this book, and one of my professors, Emmett Williams at California Institute of the Arts, had me send it to a New York publisher whose name is gone from my mind, who had originally published Henry Miller in the States, and who was starting a new series of feminist pornography. He thought he was looking to tap the bored housewife market of the that he saw as the emerging feminist movement, I guess. And so I sent it to him, and he sent it back saying it wasn't pornographic enough. Then I sent it to Knopf, and it was during the Vietnam War, and then I found out that Knopf was owned by a multinational corporation that was part of the war machine, interestingly enough, but Knopf sent it back with a note saying it wasn't a novel, and thank you very much. So I was relieved of the responsibility of having to turn Knopf down. Then I was working at a women's center, and I saw the notice up on the board for this new women's press that was starting, and sent it to them, and they accepted it. And it was on Daughters Inc.'s second list, and their first list, Ruby Fruit Jungle, was on their first list. And so it was really the very first beginnings of lesbian and women's novels. And my idea at the time, which was a fairly radical idea in 1973-4, it seems kind of silly now, but the idea at the time was to write a lesbian novel with a happy ending. In 1974, there was no such thing before the first wave of the women's movement. At the end of novels in which lesbians happened to be characters, they almost universally got killed by falling trees, or they committed suicide, or some terrible fate happened to them. And it was wonderful. I was a young person, and I was excited by hanging out in New York with all the Daughters, women and writers, and I stayed with women's publishing ever since. I published even more independently than that. I self-published a couple of books, and I was editor of the International Lesbian Feminist Journal, Sinister Wisdom, for 8 years. My latest book has just been published by Press Gang, which is the oldest still existing women's press in North America from that period. And they also started out with a regular printing press, and they were the last ones to give up the actual business of printing. Talk about undercapitalized. It's hard enough to run a publishing business, but to run a printing business with equipment that's falling apart constantly. The men sell it to you as a joke. Try to fix this. And I've known a lot of people who did fix it and held it together with rubber bands and published wonderful books, but finally that effort got to be too much. So now we have these wonderful women's presses still struggling to stay alive in the market. This problem that Ruth was talking about, where the women's presses bear the burden of developing talent, finding people who are interesting, really working with them in editorial processes, marketing their works, showing that there's an audience for the work. So they do all of the sort of expensive audience building, hand-holding kind of stuff for the authors. Then, when the authors are proven to be successful, larger companies come and pick them up and often bury their work then. So the women's presses don't get to reap the benefits of their success, and then their work, on the other hand, gets buried. Sometimes it doesn't get buried in the case of some very successful women writers, but often it does. And that's my rap about women's publishing, and now it's your turn.
Well, let's see, I guess starting with my personal experience. I had written a novel. I've been writing my whole life since I was 5. It's all I wanted to do, but and so I could sort of start back then, but I won't. The first, I would say, serious novel I wrote, I don't even know how many years ago now, 8, 9. And meanwhile, had been publishing short stories. And the novel, I admit, I tried to write one that was something I cared about a great deal and had a lot of passion about. It was about the outdoors. I write a lot about. It was about a lesbian main character. It's a historical novel. But I also was hoping it would, sell. And I got an agent, and she tried and tried and tried and couldn't sell it. So I finally dumped the agent. And literally 3 months later, I had 3 different book contracts that I got on my own with small presses. So I'm sort of here to talk about how much I love small presses. What had happened was those short stories, I took the novel to Seal Press, who published my first collection of stories, Sweat, and they read it and they said, but you know what, we really want to publish a collection of your stories, which just blew me over because nobody published collections of short stories anymore, it seemed. And they then also gave me a contract to write a novel, which was not yet written, so it was really a wonderful situation. So they published, and that was Working Parts, which I developed out of a short story they had seen. And at the same time, I had written some children's stories, and a friend of mine mentioned she had a friend in New York who was an editor for Holiday House, which is an independent children's book publisher in New York. And so I just sent that book there on my own again, having gotten rid of my agent. And this woman admitted to me later that she hates getting books from friends because then she has to read them. And they're always awful, but she liked it and published it. So I've been very, very, very pleased with my small press experience. I love working with people, both at Holiday House with my children's books and Seal Press with my adult fiction, who have a real passion for books. And I don't think you're going to find that in the corporate presses, or you might find it here and there. But even editors who have a passion for your book, are going to be gone or overridden by the marketing department. And so I think that's a huge plus. If you, I don't know many writers. I think it's hard to be a writer without having a passion for your work. There's not many writers out there who are writing to, make a lot of money. So if you are in that category of writing because you love your work, with small presses you're going to be working with people who also love writing, love ideas, and are working to get them out there. Another thing that's been occurring to me more and more recently that I was mentioning when we were talking earlier in the back room is that when you are writing for a corporate publisher, you're owned by them. And as a writer, I hear stories and stories and stories from friends who are asked to change things, huge things, asked to write in certain kinds of books. And they're sort of, that you get stuck because you need those advances, whatever it is, 20,000, 10,000, 30,000, to keep living. I was talking to a friend recently who makes her living off of her advances and was complaining how hard it is because she's owned. So in a way, even though we who write for the small presses make no money from it, we have complete artistic freedom. And that's no small thing, particularly in this world today with the arts under siege. So I think that's the biggest reason I love the small presses is because you have complete artistic freedom. Now, I don't want to sound like a goody two-shoes up here, so I will also add, if someone came to, most artists and writers, don't have money. We're trying to work jobs and write our books. It'd be very hard to turn down a big advance. I'm not saying writers shouldn't. you know, just about anyone I know would take that $30,000 advance if it was offered. But there's pitfalls, and you have to be, you know, you will be buried. There's a really, really good chance if you take that $30,000 advance, you'll be buried in a way that you wouldn't be with a small press. So that's sort of my quick spiel.
Speaking of burying, I'm thinking of two friends of mine who were published with a major press, HarperCollins and Westview, and Westview is now owned by HarperCollins as well, so it wasn't when she first published with them. But Mary Felstener's book, To Paint Her Life, which is the life of Charlotta Solomon, who is a woman who was killed during the Holocaust. And it's an incredible thing. Mary works here in the history department. She spent 10 years of her life researching this book. It was, you know, her incredible baby. They kept it in print for 2 years, and then they took it out of print. I mean, and didn't tell, you know, they just said, it's going out of print. You know, no choice on her part to take it back. You know, it was like nothing, you know. And the same thing happened with Roshni Rushtanji, who did a wonderful book on women who are living here, who are from India. And it's, you know, it's a wonderful women's book. It's a great contribution to all of us to have it. And that, too, remained in print about 2 years, and then it's no longer available. And there's nothing she can do about it, you know. So that's one of the pitfalls that goes with publishing with larger presses, that they have the power to do that. I wanted to say one other thing, and then I want to open it to your questions, either about small press or either of our authors' work. I feel very proud to be an independent bookseller today, because yesterday there was a suit filed, and I just want to share it with people, because independent booksellers are very tied into small presses, because we are the ones, first of all, that are more likely to carry the small presses. It's also that you come to us because we have the small presses and the big people don't. So recently, there was actually a suit filed earlier against Avon for giving huge chain bookstores a larger discount, which is a huge deal. It can make the difference between whether you make it or not. And they got a much bigger discount than independent bookstores did. And so they were sued, and we won that suit. Now the American Booksellers Association, which represents independent bookstores, is suing two of the large chains themselves. They're suing Borders and Barnes & Noble. And what they're arguing is that they pressure the large presses to give them those kinds of discounts, and therefore squeezing out independent bookstores. I mean, we can't discount our books the way they do all the time. So one of the effects is that the bestsellers are discounted all the time by them. We can't afford to do that, and so we're left not selling the bestsellers, and because people go elsewhere. It's not because we don't carry them, but and then we're left with the things that move much more slowly. And a lot of bookstores stay in business by selling the bestsellers, and then they keep a large backstock so that all the other books that you also want to read will be there, but that's very expensive to do. So having them pressure the large corporations, and they do it, by threatening that they won't order from them and stuff. The small presses can't afford to give higher discounts, and so they get squeezed out. The independent chain, or the big chains, don't want to buy from independent or from small presses because they don't give them those kind of things. The other thing that large chains do is that if there is a book by a small press that is very popular, that really is a success, they will order thousands of copies of it. So there'll be this, the scene is that you're a small press, a run is usually about 5,000 copies. That's what you can afford to do at any one time, because you run from, you're only able to print what you earned on your last book, and, you don't have a lot of extra. And so then you get an order for 10,000 copies from the chains. So you mortgage yourself, you do everything, you borrow money, and you print another 5,000 to fulfill this order. And then when the bill comes due from the chain, they return 9,000 copies. They order huge quantities. I mean, that's why you see those huge piles of all those books there. They order huge quantities, and then they return tons of them.
And that's not an exaggeration.
No.
That's
And
9,000 returns.
yeah, they'll return 9,000, and that causes the entire company, the entire small press, to go under. Just that one. So it's like, in a sense, if you have a huge success, it's likely to make you go under. You know, it's like because of the practices of the large chains. So anyway, follow that particular suit and shop at your independent bookstores. It's very important because they won't keep the kinds of stuff you want to read in stock. And if the small stores go out of business, there won't be places for the small presses to be sold because the chains won't carry them. And what you can read will just disappear. You know, your access to being able to read things like these two authors have written will disappear. So that's my spiel. Are there any questions?
Are there any books, publishers, independent publishers for, straight white male, like yourself? That's what I'm interested in. Poetry and short stories or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, there are small presses for every possible, group and interest. Yeah, there's actually a little book. We have an old copy I noticed here, but you can get an up-to-date copy that lists small presses. And it's a good idea because they'll list what kinds of stuff they specialize in and stuff. It's a huge book, so expect to do some research. Literary, hang on. The International Directory of Little Magazines and Small Presses. This is an old copy, but there's an up-to-date one every year. Modern Times Bookstore carries it. Huh?
What was the rest of it? The National Directory
Little Magazines and Small Presses. And it's a really good way to get yourself, that's where you start if you want to get yourself published. Even starting with a poem, you could get it into one of the small magazines. So it's a really good place to begin. Yeah.
You can understand that when a big company picks up a book and then just shelves it after 2 years, they remain to keep the publishing rights?
Sometimes. Sometimes they just hold on to it and say, well, maybe we'll reprint it, maybe not, and they hang on to it.
That's your option to take it and go
Usually
somewhere
it's
else.
in the contract that they have 6 months. Most contracts will have something like, if they don't reprint within 6 months, you can formally write them as the author and get the rights back. That's in most contracts.
But be careful when you do your contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite clear on what you meant when you talked about the big multinationals picking up, like, let's say a small press has a woman writer, and you said she's very popular, and then they prove that there's a market, but then she may get picked up by the large thing, and that is terrible. But does that mean?
Not always terrible. But
Does that mean that that they made an offer that the author couldn't refuse? Are you implying that people are choosing because of economic necessity?
People choose because
that
of
they're
money,
choosing to switch?
absolutely.
Okay. For a second there, I thought you meant that like she was being published by a small press, and then the same title was somehow they were able to pick it up and
No.
republish it only if she makes a contract and
Yeah.
changes.
yeah, she makes the contract. And also they usually pay the small press. I mean, this just happened with Calyx, which is actually wonderful in many ways. They got $350,000 for a title, and which I'm sorry, I don't know which title, but it means that Calyx, Into the Forest, that's it, yes. It means that Calyx can start publishing poetry again, because they were almost under.
But this was an example, the first thing you were talking about. It was a book that Calyx printed, and they bought the same book by paying the press $350,000 and the author $350,000.
Right.
Usually, I think what you're talking about is like the author's next book then will be picked up by a big publisher. There's two different ways it could happen.
But when they pick up the next one, they also give the author money. And it's complicated. I don't want to simplify it, because it's also true that they have greater distribution, they have greater access to marketing and stuff, and so it probably will get to more readers. And that's important, that's important to all of us. So, it becomes this decision.
Yeah, but if the small presses were able to grow, if the larger ones were somehow supporting them, then they'd get larger
Yeah.
readership as well.
It's a huge discussion. You put a bunch of writers together, and it becomes this huge battle because there are people that have made that decision for various reasons to go with large presses, and there are some good reasons for doing that. It's really complicated, and
I wanted to ask about the whole bestseller phenomenon, along with the deep discounts that are given to the chain bookstores. It's my understanding that the actual list is manipulated by the numbers that are shipped. And I'm not sure if this is true, so that's why I wanted to ask about it. So that then a publisher could ship an enormous number of books which would then be warehoused by the chains and remaindered on the shelf if they didn't sell. In other words, so then something is an instant bestseller.
it's like, where do they get those figures? Yeah. I think they get them in different ways. I know that they have certain bookstores that report every week what their sales are, not what their orders are. I think there probably are some lists that are based on what the publishers say they sold, which is what that would be. But it's really not, that's not a valid thing. The ones that are published in the New York Times, I happen to know, are from, they have certain bookstores, and those bookstores are not, part of the contract is that they are not allowed to tell anybody that they're one of those stores. Because then, all sorts of tampering could be done with that. You could get everybody, all your friends, to go into that store and buy your book, and and then go sell it to the used book store next door later. But so it's based on sales, supposedly, but I don't know what the other stores who are on the list are, what all the stores that are on that list are doing, but that's what they're supposed to do. Any other questions of either of our? Yeah.
Would we be able to find the novels from independent press at the big bookstores? Would they carry them at all? Or?
Well, some do. I mean, maybe 20 years ago there was not a women's section in any large bookstore, chain bookstore. There now is, because there's been a market created, and so some of them will, they have to have something to put in there. And so some of them, so it partly depends on the particular chain, but not near as deep. There won't be as many.
And for a shorter period of time. Like
Yeah.
I might carry my novel the first 3 months it comes out, and then they will send them back, whereas Modern Times will carry it for a couple of years. I hope.
Like when I
Or
went to
longer.
Borders- Like if I went to Borders, would I find your books in there, or no, not at all?
My book was in Borders and Barnes & Noble for a while, but it might be gone now. I mean, the people reported to me that they found a couple copies, but I don't know if they reordered them after those couple copies are sold. And of course, I recommend that people go to the small bookstores to buy it, personally. But they do carry them for very short periods of time, and then unless somebody comes in and orders 1,000 of them, they send them back.
So
But
they
very
decide
short-
based on sales what they'll keep. And
Very short shelf life in the big chains.
My publisher, Seal Press, actually said they dread big orders from Barnes & Noble because it just, for the reasons Ruth was saying, they get this big old order from Barnes & Noble and they don't know if they can trust it or not. And they usually come back, and
after a while, too,
You have to give them what they, if they ask for a certain amount, can you give them less, or would they not accept that?
well, see, I've talked to my publisher about that. It's tricky for all of us in this. It's sort of like, at least among the small presses and the authors, there's no good guys, bad guys in these decisions. Because I say that to my publisher, and they're like, well, how can you turn down an order from Barnes & Noble for, 10,000 copies of a book? I think they sort of go in hoping. So, no, they haven't done that yet. Said, no, we're not going to send it, because they always, occasionally, I know with Seal, Barnes & Noble nationwide decided to do a window display of one of their books. And that really did sell it. So there's always kind of this hope, just like with authors, there's always kind of this hope that, this title will be picked up. So it's really a hard call, because Barnes & Noble can break you, but they can make you, So.
not so simple. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Okay, I hesitated now. Well, I mean, I understand that it's very complex in that, but like a few years ago, last year at Modern Times, I buy all my books at Modern Times, and I love Modern Times, and everybody
Thank you.
should go there if you haven't been there. And I heard Margaret Randall, an author, speaking there last year, and I think it was her brother ran an independent bookstore in New Mexico, House, or somewhere like that. And it had just closed the day I saw her, and she referred to this takeover by the big companies, and it was just so frightening and sad because that store had been there like 20 years or something, and that was really depressing. And so my question is, I worry now all the time about Modern Times and other stores. I always worry about places I really like. And how, what, like, besides making sure we all go there and buy our books there, what other things can we do? And just a comment sort of about how worried I should be. Or no, about really, because she had some pretty dramatic statistics on the independent, not the presses, but the stores that have closed, and it's both, obviously.
Yeah.
But how much is this a landslide, and how much is it dealing with some of the suits happening that, where's the balance, or can you even say?
It's pretty serious, I think. I mean, there are a lot of stores that have been around a long time that are closing, independent stores. There's another organization that you should know about called the Feminist Bookstore News, which, in terms of women's books, is located actually here in San Francisco. It was started by Carol C.J., who was involved in some of the earlier presses, women's presses. And part of what she wanted to do was give support to the women's bookstores that were struggling, and some way for them to, communicate with each other, give each other advice and support, and also to try to figure out ways to create a reading public for our books. And I think she's been really important in doing that for women authors enormously. So part of it is, yes, buy your books at independent stores, but also whatever ways all of us as readers and lovers of literature can do to try to keep an audience for the kind of stuff, keep readers that want the work that we're doing. Because, we'll get stuff that nobody's ever heard of this author, and we think it's really good, but it's hard for us to figure out how to tell everybody, this person, this is really great, So it's sort of the work of all of us to try to figure out how we keep creating, because people often don't go in and buy books of people they've never heard of. So how do we, all of us, it's sort of the job of all of us to figure out how to create an audience for the new stuff we're writing too. Certainly for the ones that have been writing, but also for the new people that are writing great stuff, and how to get them known enough that someone will rush to their bookstore to buy it. And then we're likely to be, the independents are likely to be the only ones that have it. So, so I don't know if that's a good answer, but it is a serious problem. And Modern Times is okay, we're going to hang in there, but we're not rolling in bucks right now. We're actually going to...
At Modern Times, they have regular readings of authors, which must help with that.
Yeah.
Readership.
Yeah.
But being worried is important. I was trying to arrange some readings in LA, and I called up from a list I had of all the women's bookstores, and 4 of the 5 bookstores that I called, some of them had been there for 15, 20 years, had just closed. I was really shocked in the greater LA area. I was really shocked that so many of them had just all gone. The women's bookstore in San Francisco closed 2 years ago. So they're a very, very precarious position for the independent bookstores.
Oakland was 2 years before that.
Yeah.
Do online book sales rescue a lot of the independents?
Well, Amazon.com, we don't know what exactly it's going to do, but it could be a big problem because you can, as long as you can get your book in 2 days and it's discounted, so it ends up even with the shipping fee to be cheaper than when you get it at Modern Times. People are, I think, turning to that. We don't know how much at this point. It's hard to gauge exactly how much. The online sales that we do, you know, we mostly, you know, people look to us for stuff they can't get anywhere else, is sort of what we end up doing. We have a little online thing. We do have a website. We're very proud to have a website. We got that together. But we don't have all of our titles on the web, so, you know, they can't just sort of cruise everything and find what they want. We have put a number of our Spanish titles on, our books in Spanish, because that's something that's not very available. Amazon doesn't have that, and you know, it's not available as much. So, and that we are getting stuff from, and it might be helpful. I don't know what it's going to do. You know, I haven't thought a lot. It'd be interesting to think more about what it does to small presses. I'm not sure, but we'll see. We need more help getting more of our stuff online, for one thing, and then figuring out how to really use it. But yeah, thanks for the question. Anything else? Anyone else?
I got several of my poems in the newspaper, of course. You know, you always do that, letters to the editor.
That'll do it. Okay, thank you. Thank you both a lot.